Well, so for our last presentation, and I think we're going to get done early today, which is always a nice thing on a Saturday afternoon, but Jake Tibbles and I are going to talk about Blind Bay advocacy. Jake, as you know, I think everybody knows, has worked for over 15 years to conserve and manage some of the most treasured landscape in the Thousand Islands and St. Lawrence Valley region. Appointed Executive Director of the Thousand Islands Land Trust, TILT, in 2012. He's overseen TILT's renewal of accreditation by the Land Trust Alliance Accreditation Commission and TILT's growth in conserved lands, educational programming, and staffing. Jake also sits on the New York Land Trust Alliance Advisory Board and recently served on the board of American Friends of the Canadian Land Trust. A native of northern New York, Jake has a lifelong passion for the outdoors and a keen appreciation for the importance of the greater St. Lawrence River Valley. This appreciation has led to his co-ownership in Green Meadow Consulting, which provides capacity support to nonprofits, specializing in the development of baseline documentation reports and land management plans for land trusts. So where is Jake? Did I lose? You can come on up. So we're going to do this together. I'll start off with my part about saving Blind Bay. And I'd just like to begin the presentation by reading a statement I made to Save the Rivers Board at last fall's board meeting. Saving Blind Bay from the Oak-Conceived Customs and Border Protection CBP plan to construct an industrial-style facility and dredge one of the most historically significant remaining muskie spawning grounds is one of the most imperative issues tackled by Save the River in its 45 years of existence. Save the River's founding issue, stopping winter navigation, had a significant positive impact on the river environment, its culture, and its economy. Saving Blind Bay is of equal importance as it is another example of a federal agency attempting to impose its will on our area's environment and tourism-based economy. The dredging of an environmental treasure such as Blind Bay, which many of us have known for most of our lives, would have a detrimental effect on over 53 species of fish, fowl, reptiles, and other species. This is unacceptable when there are other viable options to build a facility that supports CBP's mission. There are several similarities between Save the River's fight to block winter navigation and Saving Blind Bay. Both issues galvanize the river community to take action to preserve the river environment. Both issues brought forward support from powerful U.S. senators representing New York State. Both issues have received support from U.S. representatives and elected New York State and local officials. And both issues received full support and help from Save the River's board. The staff and I are fully committed to the advocacy and partnership effort working with TILT, TI Park, Thousand Islands Association, and others to save Blind Bay. We hope that you share the same level of commitment to this defining Save the River issue and ask that we be able to reach out to you as necessary for help with advocacy, editing, letter writing, writing articles, and attending events. Save the River's team is strong, and you, our board, are a key component of that strength. Thank you for all you do for Save the River and the river. I believe that together, with the support of the river community, we will save Blind Bay. There was complete agreement and support for this statement on saving Blind Bay from our board. So with that, Jake, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, John. And first and foremost, I'd just like to thank the Save the River board and the staff for inviting me here to speak and talk a little bit about the transaction as a whole and how we progressed through it, how we learned about it, and really our reaction overall. you know, a lot of times it's easy for us, you know, John and I, to get in front of cameras and talk about the great work that our organizations are doing and why we're doing it and why Blind Bay is so important to save. And it's easy to absorb that recognition as a director. But truth be told, at the end of the day, you know, it's the staff who are working tirelessly behind the scenes, you know, working on our outreach initiatives, our communication plans, and in Tilt's case, you know, working on the transactional aspect of actually acquiring the piece of land out from underneath CBP. It's a lot of heavy work that's gone into it. It's been an absolute honor to work with John and his team. You guys just continually, you know, knock the cover off the ball. So I would be remiss if I didn't just take a second to acknowledge the great work that our staff are doing to support us. So well done, guys. Thank you. So just real quick, some background on the Thousand Islands Land Trust. Many of you may be aware of it, but we are a local regional land trust who focuses on conserving some of our region's most important natural resources, you know, our waters, our wetlands, our wildlife. You know, while the Thousand Islands Land Trust annually puts out and offers, you know, educational programming, we work with our good partners like SLELO on invasive species management and advancing that fight. We also work very closely with Rails to Trails program, trying to create more accessible areas for our communities. But at the end of the day, you know, our core focus is on the ground land conservation. You know, our goal is to place, you know, our important landscape and some, like John, you know, eloquently said, our most treasured landscapes under permanent protection. These are just a few of our conservation highlights. Tilt was incepted in 1985. So over that period of time, we've made some pretty good headway. For most of you who are familiar with the landscape in the Thousand Islands, it has been relatively subdivided over time. So a lot of our parcels that we are assembling year in and year out are averaging 40, 50, 60 acres. So it's a lot of work to amass, you know, 11,000, 12,000 acres. Some of our preserves that you may be familiar with are Zenda Farms Preserve, Otter Creek Preserve, Crooked Creek, which is in the core of the A2A. Crooked Creek Preserve now totals over 2,500 acres. Just a really great conservation achievement. This is Delaney Bay on Grindstone Island. Currently, the Land Trust protects over 50% of Grindstone, which is the fourth largest island in the Thousand Islands, about 5,000 acres. Much of our work falls within what's called the A2A corridor, what we like to call the A2A Wildway, or the Algonquin to Adirondacks. This is a critical corridor for wildlife movement migrating between the two great parks. It's also been, you know, documented and researched and shown to be one of the most resilient landscapes kind of in the Northeast. You know, as we face the continued pressures from development and climate change, areas like this are going to become more and more sought after as a refuge for wildlife, animals, and even humans. So why Blind Bay? Why is this one important? I mean, we've talked about, you know, all the different topics today, you know, wetlands, ecosystems, our fisheries, our birds, and really, you know, Blind Bay embodies almost all of those aspects, all of those important qualities that we've grown to love along the river. I really love this photo from Chris Murray. As you can see, Blind Bay is perfectly centered in this photo. You've got the, you know, unbroken uplands in the background, and then that carries on into what you actually see here as the A2A in the background. Interestingly, Blind Bay is bookmarked between development and, you know, in all consideration, it's intensive development. The shorelines have been cleared. You know, lawns have been mowed up to, you know, the shoreline. Not to call out anyone here, but you know, really Blind Bay is one of those few last remaining undeveloped sections of the shoreline, not only in Clayton, but throughout the Thousand Islands, especially on mainland. The majority of our mainland shorelines have been developed. Some of the reasons why, Blind Bay is important: water quality, flood control. As John mentioned, over 53 different species have been documented to utilizing the bay. We know that because of the great work that Dr. John Farrell and the Thousand Islands Biological Station has done. This is home to so many of our secretive marsh birds, least bitterns, American bitterns. If you go there early in the morning, you can see the terns that Lee and Jim McGarry just passionately talked about. Then you've got the upland habitat, which, as you can see, is relatively unbroken and carries contiguously inland. Speaking about the A2A, a lot of the wildlife, especially our larger mammals, are actually utilizing the A2A to traverse across the region. Unfortunately, the river hasn't frozen yet this year. Hopefully it does. But on normal years where the river does freeze across, it's not unordinary to see, fox, deer, coyotes, bobcats actually utilizing these undeveloped habitats as on and off ramps to the river as they traverse the St. Lawrence. They travel across every once in a while. From the Till office, we'll spot a fox shooting out across to Grindstone Island. We're always hoping that they make it there safely. But there's so many reasons why saving Blind Bay is important. So the conservation values of this part of the river have been known for quite some time. As I mentioned, John Farrell and his team have been studying Blind Bay for about 32 years, a little bit over 32 years. Till actually moved forward with the first acquisition in Blind Bay. It's about 26 acres and around 700, maybe 600 and so linear feet of shoreline. That was in 2016. That was made possible by a federal grant program called NAWCA, North American Wetland Conservation Act. Somewhat ironic that this area is being conserved with federal funding. Investments are being made by critical conservation programs. And, as John mentioned, here we are turning around and trying to, stop a federal agency from taking over this area. Next one. So really, rumors, how it all began, we started to hear rumors right after the holidays. It's not necessarily something that you want to come back to the office to, hearing rumors about a large industrial complex being built along the river. And for those of you who've grown up, who've lived on the river your whole life, who love the river, you know that type of complex does not belong on our shorelines. It's uncharacteristic, and it really does begin to change the very nature of the shoreline that we've all grown to love. So again, we started to hear a little bit that this was a possibility through the rumor mills, through realtors, in Clayton. Then in February, the beginning of February, the code enforcement, or the zoning enforcement officer in the town of Orleans received this letter from CBP. And really, if you had time to read through it, but I guess we are ahead of time, so we could this really does lay out the size and the scope of the facility that we were talking about. Initially, our thoughts were, okay, there's a state troopers barracks next to the Price Chopper, if you're familiar with that, troopers barracks, and it's quite nice. You actually drive down, Route 12, and you don't even really notice that it's there. By reading, this initial letter, you quickly realize that that's not the scope of the facility that we're talking about. So the letter was released, it wasn't a couple days, and John and I are instantly in communication with each other, trying to wrap our heads around, how we should approach this, what were the next steps. And we both agreed that, we needed to be informed. We needed to understand exactly what was going on here, how far CBP had made it through the process. And, you know, as you can see here, came to the quick conclusion that they had gotten as far to have completed a draft EA. And upon reading this, I mean, you know, I think for most of us, if you've had a chance to read through the environmental assessment put forth, you know, by Customs and Border Protection, it's almost hard to comprehend how they came to a conclusion that a facility of this size would not have an environmental impact, you know, on such an area that was, you know, in an area that was considered an environmental hotspot. So as I start to describe the facility, you know, this is really what it broke down to. As we began to learn more and more about what the scope of work was, it became fairly apparent that we had a major issue on our hands. We're looking at, you know, about 48,000, 50,000 square foot of constructed facility, you know, housing up to 75 agents, which in the EA also talks about having the ability to expand in the future, but with no specific details on how much was going to be expanded. You know, the slide here obviously breaks down kind of what we were looking at: dog kennels and pervious surfaces. Ultimately, the 22-acre piece that they had identified as being their ideal or preferred site was going to be no more after the construction of this facility. Now, we don't have design plans in-house. We are obviously working with very limited information beyond you know, the environmental assessment, some of the letters and correspondences that we've received from CBP, and then subsequent conversations that we've had with them. But ultimately, when you start to, you know, piece everything together, you know, these are some of the facilities that I was able to find that Border Patrol has constructed throughout the United States. You know, at a glance, that's clearly not compatible with what we're talking about here on the St. Lawrence River and all the work that we're trying to put forth to conserve this place. So, you know, coming off the February letter and reading the EA and really having some initial conversations around, okay, what's the next steps? What are we going to do? CBP did open up a 30-day public comment period. During that period, well over 1,000 comments were submitted. Many of you participated in that. You know, throughout that process, Save the River, Thousand Islands Land Trust, TI Park Association, New York State DEC, you know, the various Facebook pages and our ambassadors, volunteers, and supporters in the community, you know, really rallied behind it. And as John said, you know, galvanizing the community, you know, spoke with one voice on this topic. I spent a lot of time with our county legislator, Phil Reed, and he goes on to say, you know, out of all the issues that I've dealt with and how many years I've spent in politics and, you know, taking into consideration how divided issues are in our country, he goes, I've never seen a topic or an issue come forth that everyone was on the same side with, and that's obviously Blind Bay. So, you know, after the public comment period had closed, you know, really it was back to the drawing board and how we were going to move forward with this, you know, how we were going to continue to gain momentum and traction, you know, speak with local representatives, our elected officials. And so we moved forward with a pretty broad, comprehensive campaign to inform, you know, Senator Schumer, Congresswoman Tenney, Senator Walczyk, who was assemblyman at the time, again, Phil Reed, and everyone, you know, came around and was in support of it. They were able to write us letters. Towards the end of summer, we ended up taking Congresswoman a tour of Blind Bay, and I just, you know, when we got back for, you know, the interviews, you know, live on-camera interviews, you know, I think we were all a little bit, you know, stunned. And explain, you know, her thoughts on this. She goes, you know, after taking a look at Blind Bay, you know, the first question that jumps out at me is why, you know, as she states here in her quote, why Blind Bay? You know, it doesn't make sense. Why is this the location that Customs and Border Patrol is choosing to site this facility? We spent a lot of time, over the summer, bringing awareness to the issue, communicating with donors, again, elected officials, but also folks who have been in the field for years. Many people came forward to provide expertise, individuals who had, been part of writing environmental law in the country, offering time and assistance. Our greatest, as we began to communicate with Customs and Border Patrol, or Border Protection, was the fear of eminent domain. It was very clear that, this was their preferred site and that they weren't backing down from it. Even, all the public comments that were presented and submitted, the support and the voices coming forth from our elected officials, during our phone calls and conversations that we had with CBP, they kept reiterating that Blind Bay is our preferred site. We then began looking at alternatives. We quickly came to the realization that if we were going to avoid eminent domain, we had to present, or at least work with the local community to present alternatives that CBP could consider, an alternative that was either comparable or even better location than Blind Bay. That's when we connected with Town Supervisor Brent Sweet in the town of Alexandria. Folks probably have heard that the town of Alexandria purchased the old Bonnie Castle Rec Center on the southern side of the street from Price Chopper, right next to the 81 on-ramp and off-ramp. It's a site that's been developed as the old rec center and rink. Really an already industrialized, built-out area, kind of a perfect scenario for this type of facility that CBP was proposing. So drawing board had follow-up conversations, Zoom calls with CBP and presented it. And it seemed like we started to gain some traction. Okay, they were going to consider some of these options and start to back off Blind Bay. It wasn't too long after that this is the letter that we received from CBP, and basically, outlining that if we did not give them access at this time, Blind Bay Associates was the owner of the property. Tilt hadn't taken ownership at that time yet, but obviously, we've developed a strong relationship with Dennis Weller and Gene Armani, who are the owners of Blind Bay Associates, and they shared with us this letter. And basically, CBP was looking to get access or regain access to the property to complete its environmental surveys. It was clear to us at that time that they weren't backing off. The conversations that we were having with them, while they seemed like they were fruitful and they were going to result in some tangible compromises moving forward and looking at alternatives, it was clear that they had their sights set on Blind Bay and that they were going to continue to move forward. So on November 30th, I'm excited to report that Tilt did successfully purchase the property, the 22 acres. I actually, speaking with Zell Stever last night, he liked to describe it as the big steal. So we might have to coin it as that moving forward. But we did successfully acquire the property on November 30th. And moving forward, going to continue to work with Save the River and all of our partners and the elected officials to stay vigilant. That, like I said, the 90 days that they had posted in their letter, that came to on December 19th. And still today, there hasn't been any word from CBP. John? Yeah?
You're doing such a great job. Don't go right. Just leave that up for a minute. I just want to focus on this slide for a minute so people see the breadth of this coalition. It is not just Save the River and Tilt, but you've got the town of Orleans. You've got Lawrence's Bluefish Radio with 100,000 followers out there. The River Institute, Thousand Islands Association with 700 members. Thousand Islands Art Center's on board. T.I. Park has had a huge voice in this and is still very interested. The Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, one of the biggest water keepers on the Great Lakes, is on board. The Swim, Drink, and Fish is the Lake Ontario Waterkeeper. Again, a huge waterkeeper over on the North Shore. T.I. Life, Ship Watchers, and we are working to broaden this out to larger organizations around New York State and Canada. So it's an active coalition with a lot of people, a lot of love for the river, a lot of love for the fish and the environment. So, do we have another slide there? So, moving forward, we've talked about plans moving forward. Jake's talked about what I think is unique in environmental activism. So many times in my experience, when you see something that's going to damage the environment, you go in and you push pretty hard and you say you can't do this and these are the 10 reasons why you can't do that and you've got to stop now. And what we've been able to do is offer perfectly good alternatives at frankly a better price than they were going to get by buying this land to CBP. So I think that's having a positive alternative is important on this issue because we do support, obviously we all support CBP's mission. If you can just, well, that's the right picture. Going forward in February, we're going to have an initial Blind Bay stewardship event where we're going to have Cub Scouts and we're going to have other kids from the local area that have already been working constructing bird boxes, wood duck boxes, bat boxes, and getting ready to plant trees. So these kids are going to come out here and help us get this land in shape and be even more productive. So we think that's very important. What else do I have? This, I got to say, this is Jake's slide. I love this slide. But if there are any questions, we're here to answer them. Don. You want to start?
John and I are still debating that at this point. It's the unknown. I think that's the worst part of navigating this whole issue is CBP's very conservative on how much information they provide us. And from a legal perspective, they didn't miss that deadline. That is encouraging news. Typically, the federal government does not bluff when it sends out formal letters. So we were, heading into the holiday season, we were fully anticipating to be served through a federal court, and then basically CBP would be initiating the eminent domain process to regain access to the property. Even though that may or may not have been temporary access, they would actually have initiated the overall eminent domain process, which is paying forward that could be an incredibly expensive proposition if we want to keep it out of hands.
I think there's a key calendar line in there too, and Jake's explained it, but in order to, if they were able to get a court order to get on the property, which we don't want them to do, they've got to then move forward and do a environmental assessment that's going to stand the test anywhere. They've got to do things like bat surveys, they've got to finish their environmental surveys, and it takes a long time to plan for those, to schedule for those. So we've also talked that we might be sitting here next year at the same conference saying, well, we think we're hearing about eminent domain, but we're not much further along. So part of our job is going to be to work with our coalition and keep this Save Blind Bay project alive in the minds and hearts of all of us that love the river.
Other questions?
What's the plan for the property use that they prevent?
So generally speaking, like many other conservation projects, keep the forever
fortunate enough to get in there this fall with the beautiful fall weather we had and do a combined staff cleanup. So you can see a lot of people, Tilt and Save the River people in here that you know. But it got us, you know, on the ground, in the mud. It's too bad Larry Kingsley isn't here. He can talk about walking around up there in the mud. But, you know, this, as I say, it's an environmental treasure. I remember going down to this place when I was a kid, about 8 years old, when I could sneak out in my little aluminum boat with a 7.5 horse outboard and get far enough away and my mom wouldn't see me. This was the place I would head to look over the side and see pike and look for a muskie. And this is a treasure, and it's a treasure we have to protect. So I think.
Do we know why this the customer wants to invent a bigger site than they have?
So there's many reasons that we've heard, both through local agents, but also through through our conversations that we've had directly with John Petrillo and the CPD. Ultimately, they're running our space in the Coast Guard station where they are, so they are housed in the space, the Coast Guard station on Bus. They also see the bridge as being a hindrance to any sort of calls, any sort of issues that they have to respond to. So getting off Wellesley Island, if there was an issue on the bridge and they couldn't get across, they would be able to respond to the border crossing or some sort of drug trafficking, whatever you need that they're dealing with on a regular basis. Blind Bay seems to be a location that they believe is a direct line into Route 12, parallels the river, into direct shot to 81 and crossover to the border. And it does provide water access. It would be really great if they would agree to come up and actually visit the site. From what we understand, both Army Corps, who's acting as interagency support, like realtor almost, or CBP, neither that department or CBP have actually been to the site. So I know the environmental consultant actually had to go there to develop the game. Anyone who's making decisions about the location and alternatives actually hasn't been to the region and actually do some visits. I mean, if you go into Blind Bay, it's not like a lot of the rocky shorelines you see. It's characteristic of the river and then drops off to a nice deck where you've got access and control over it. This is very, very shallow. I mean, right now, you probably have 20, 30 feet of mud before you actually got to water. And then it's a very gradual descent before you even get a flat bottom boat in there. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, the amount of dredging that would need to occur to get Border Patrol watercraft, 25, 26-foot watercraft in there, would be astonishing. And that impact alone would render that portion of the bay pretty much, and this is coming from John Farrell, unusable for the muscle launch. Think about the terns, wanting to fish in there, after a CBP boat, took off in its own mud. I think they're just not going to utilize the bay. So it's really hard to comprehend the thinking.
Yeah, you talked about John Farrell and the dredging that would happen. Could you just in case some people haven't heard, could you just talk about some of the research that's been going on there for 20 plus years and why this bay is so important?
Well, yeah, John's, you got a good group. Jake Garner, sorry, Jeff is here too. But they have been researching that since the 1990s. They know the muskie that have been in there. They know the young that are spawned and in there, and of course now they're going back in and they're putting more young in there that John's raising. So this is a serious research site that's going on, 30 years of research now. This isn't somebody just coming out and saying, oh, you can't dredge out there because I don't like you. And the other thing, going to the dredging point, I think we're talking, if they're going to operate their boats and want to operate their boats year-round or for 10 months or 11 months of the year, you're talking dredging 4.5, 5 feet in there. And what are they going to do with icing?
That's actually one of the things that we're documenting right now. So just again, it was behind the scenes activity. So Save the River and Tibbles staff are actually every Thursday going out, taking photos, documenting the ice cover, Bay is freezing up way earlier than some of the alternatives that we've identified for CBP, and obviously that means that that ice is going to retreat much later in the spring. That's going to shut down their kind of field of operation, times that generation operate going on that arena. And speaking about John Farrell's research, one of the programs that he's running is the muscle archer stocking program, and this is a plug for the Thousand Electrical Station and Friends Group, which is also trying to raise money for the work that John's doing out on Governor's Island. But they're actually raising muskellunge, fry, and fingerlings out at the station. You can see there's a picture of me right there. Give it a shot. I want to stop the tape, but you can see the muscle finger in my hands. And then a couple pictures to the right after we release them. They're just kind of hanging out just above the vegetation before they disappear. It doesn't take them long to disappear out of ice. It's pretty impressive. But historically, Blind Bay has been one of the most productive muskellunge spawning and rearing sites that John has studied over those 32 years. And the restocking program is really, an attempt to kind of bring some new life in the bay.
We're already proud of that little Save Blind Bay billboard that's out there too. It's got to become a community pet. Jim, I know you had a question.
Why do you say that CBP is going to do another environmental assessment, or is that only with the assessment?
Well, it's two questions.
Yeah, so the way it's the NEPA process. It's part of their environmental review process that the federal government has to undertake in order to determine that the site is viable or can be justified for the amount of impact that it would cause. And so the draft survey, which was frustrating for all of us, today they said there was going to be a draft EA, and in the draft EA they came to the conclusion that there was going to be no environmental impact or no significant environmental impact, and yet it didn't even address the whole aquatic. So that was just the terrestrial component. They actually did not do the necessary studies to determine whether or not the dredging, the dock system, fuel storage, and all that would have an impact on the bay site. So really it was an incomplete study that they put out for us to comment on, which was frustrating to say the least. But the next step, that's why they wanted access to Blind Bay so badly, because they didn't complete all those studies. We think that they tried to get that out to the community, fast track the project. And so they potentially got ahead of themselves, and actually that's what we believe created the opportunity for us to kind of come in behind and purchase the property, because they still have to do those critical studies moving forward. If they gained access to the property, they wouldn't be able to do some of those studies, because they'd be like bat surveys, bird surveys, fishery surveys. That wouldn't be able to occur until like July through September. So we could be, like John mentioned earlier, we could be this time next year waiting for a final determination from them which site to choose. But we didn't want to have to wait.
Well, I was going to say that the way this process works, the federal government is supposed to do an environmental assessment. And the assessment suggests that there's a significant effect on the quality of the human environment, then they're required to do an environmental impact statement. And what's very clear, and I spent some time on a critical career working with these agents, is that these guys jumped the gun. It was pretty clear that they did it for political reasons, because they had someone in office, highest level, who thought water crossing was a bad deal. You don't look very far, go down to the Mexican-U.S. border and see what the whole scene is down there. And the paranoia that the federal agencies, this kind of an opportunity to get out in front inappropriately, they did that. And now you're in a situation where they didn't do their work correctly, didn't follow the process that's set forth in federal law, good regulation. And so what this is going to mean is that it's going to be a long, slow slog going forward. And the problem is going to be to keep this in the forefront of the public. But my sense is you will win, but it's not going to be easy.
And I think we agree with you on that, Sal, you've done a lot of work on this, but over the next couple of months, we're going to be coming back to this group and thousands of other supporters and asking for another round of emails and letters and telephone calls, because there has been a change since all this started. Senator Schumer continues to be supportive of them going somewhere else. Congresswoman Tenney came up here and, she said, why here? On camera, that wasn't us, just why here? So we're going to continue to put pressure on them to turn around and put pressure and say, go somewhere else. So we're trying to be very proactive on this while we've got the coalition together. Chris.
Chris and then Don.
You mentioned buying Castle Tibbles as an alternative, as we all know.
But how does that fit their requirement for water access?
So that's, yeah, and so I had something nice that I done that I actually did. Goes back to the whole beginning, because, both Tibbles and Save the River and many people who submitted comments and TI Park Association, we all acknowledge and recognize the importance of customs border protection. We understand that they have a very important job to do in keeping our border safe. We are a border community. We're appreciative. At the same point in time, we also come from the belief that this is our hometown, this is our communities where we live, understand it. They can accomplish their mission, their operations, and not basically undermine some of our most precious potential resources like Long Bay. And so that's one of the things that we try to do. We also try to be very careful about identifying other sites, because that might even create other problems, right? We don't want to be part of that problem. But when the rec center came forward, it just made sense. It's already fully developed. The town of Alexandria owns it. It's already off the tax rolls. It has sewer, it has water, it has immediate access, all the things that they've explained that are important to them, like 81 Roots Route, and we've got all the facilities right there. And they're going to have bright lights. And that's one of the things that jumped out at me in their descriptions, is they're going to have perimeter fences. So they're going to have high fencing. They're going to have those high intensity LED lights. Now you've got all that development that's already there, border crossing, bridge, and price shopper. So that makes sense. But you're right. Okay. Well, what's that? That's an incomplete picture, because they really want that water access, and they're going to kind of hang their hat on that with respect to Blind Bay if we can't couple, the rec center with some sort of water access. So we've been working very diligently. Obviously I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we had some great communication conversations with, our region state parks. Those conversations have gone all the way up to the Parks Commissioner, and we're looking at alternatives in a few of the closer state parks for water access. Areas that are already developed where there actually could be a symbiotic relationship between CPP and parks, right? CPP needs more dockage and storage. Well, maybe that all can be done in a way that also improves our park system, which is, is a benefit to all our people. So we're working on that. At the same point in time, we can come up with the greatest alternative in the world. Now we just need the federal agency to actually consider.
And just the fact that we've got bipartisan support, I think, is critical in here. Yes, Al.
Don, and then we'll come back
Yeah.
to Zell. Sorry. We'll go with Heather first.
Yeah.
We'll go with the lady first.
Thank you for mentioning the lights. I believe that will be destructive from the smallest living creature right up to our own sleep patterns. Any of us that live anywhere in this area, that would definitely affect us as well as the 53 species that use Blind Bay as their home. Have you been provided any data that proves the need from a safety perspective for a place of this size? I have to credit my son Justin Stoll students CBE for an answer, and get to know the answer. It may be a question for all of you to ask.
I just want to comment. That's a great question. He shouldn't feel frustrated because Senator Schumer's not getting answers either. We're not getting answers.
But it might be a question for enough of
Yeah.
us to ask.
For the next round.
So there's the, all of this, there's the outreach, there's the advocacy, there's the land acquisition, there's a lot of different components that are all kind of happening simultaneously. There's also the legal end, and I think you would touch upon it. One of the other things that we did this summer is we did interviews with environmental attorneys, because we knew that if it actually came to a head where they did initiate the eminent domain process, I mean, that's a very specialized legal process that at the land trust, while we do legal issues all the time with conservation easements and other things, we don't have any experience with the eminent domain process. So we ended up hiring an attorney, a local gentleman who actually has a strong ties to the river, and he felt it was important to get out ahead of this and start submitting for requests. So that was some of the work that we did towards the end of the summer and over the fall, and we did finally get some responses back from CPP, and they're non-responsive responses. So, and there may be reasons that may be part of an agenda. It could be someone sitting in the back office just, doing whatever, the copy-paste response. But we do plan on going through the appeals process, the FOIA appeals process. In addition, coming out of this conference, one of the next steps for John and I is to reach back out to Schumer and Tenney with a specific request on this FOIA information. And it goes right back to Tenney's question, why do they need this? Why here? And that's what those FOIA requests and that data that they're requesting is going to get to. It goes right back to the question. So, is there a need here? Are the incidences of border crossings and interceptions, are they at the level that justify a facility of this magnitude?
I just wanted to add on that as I lose my voice, because I hear some kind of caustic comments sometimes about, well, why are you wasting your time with those politicians? They don't know anything about the river. The river's a treasured and special place. Well, to give him credit, Schumer comes up here fishing quite a bit. He loves to fish. He loves the river. He loves to go to ABM. Tenny spent a lot of her childhood summers up here, and the minute she got on Jeff's boat, she started to talk about places where she'd been as a child. So they're familiar with the area. They're familiar with how special and treasured it is. So that's good. Is there somebody?
Was there a new person? Okay, so
Don.
Don and then
Okay.
I appreciate you addressing the light pollution issue. This came to my attention a couple of years ago. A friend of mine, an ornithologist, has done research on light pollution as it regards the avian population. And it was quite an eye-opener for me. So thank you for dealing with the light issue. And I wish you well on the eminent domain issue. I had the personal displeasure of dealing with the foreign entities that were in our region a few years ago to put wind turbines in, and I had to deal with the threat of eminent domain for the high tension, high voltage, 175 kV line going right down through the whole length of my property. It was not a healthy time in my life. My question: several years ago, quite a number of years ago, John Farrell in his group stated that the western side of Swan Bay is a prodigious spawning area for mussels. I'm not so sure that that's the case today, but in the case of Blind Bay, in your presentation, you said that it is a high production area for the spawning of mussels. Did you say that, did you guess that this might be the highest production area left in this area of the St. Louis River?
There's somebody that knows more about that. Jeff, you want to?
If you were looking for a percentage, it would be a pretty safe bet to say that 20% of the viable spawning in our basin is between
Everybody, I think, in this room understands we're talking about the apex predator in the river. And, you know, Lawrence asked the question earlier, it was on the birds, about the ecological effects. But the muskie are under a lot of pressure, even though this last couple of years were a good year. We've got to protect that area as a muskie and 53 other aquatic species breeding ground there. And you didn't even talk about the upland species that are in there.
So we have time for one last question. I think it's
Comment is that the question was asked, you know, what are you doing to figure out how to get this, the Border Patrol folks access? That's not your problem, that's their problem. And you don't want to do that ahead of them. Let them do their work first. If you are in a position to respond to that. But volunteering at this point, probably not a good idea, given what I understand about how the legal process works. The fact that you put up a piece of land where they can put it in an industrial facility is terrific. But let them do the work. Let them do the work. You don't do that work. You're going to be in a position of protecting this resource for the entire home.
And that has been a subject of a lot of debate.
Any other questions? We're not hearing any others. Again, I want to thank you, Jake. I want to thank everybody for coming and attending our 34th Annual Winter Environmental Conference. I hope you'll be back next year for our 35th. Have a lovely weekend, safe trip home, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.